Okay, everyone, like I said, I'm going to try to wrap this up for you, and I've got a copy of the test. I know you'd like me to hold it up and let you have a little glance at it, but I'll look at it for you. Let's go back to step families. I was talking about structure types, stepfather being the most common, stepmother being next, blended being the third and most difficult to make work. Now, some of the reasons, or should be obvious to you, is that the kids, everybody's making adjustments. Because remember, we talked about relocation. If you've got two separate households merging into one, somebody's got to move into the other household. And again, that amplifies the adjustment problems. Or maybe they both have to move because neither household or home is big enough to accommodate the entire new family. And so everybody moves. Then you also have a stepfather that one group has to adjust to, the other group has to adjust stepmother, and you have stepbrothers and or sisters to compound the problem even further. And so it is the most difficult. Now, when it comes to adjusting to step families, and I said it takes 3 to 5 years, best case scenario is that you don't rush into the step parent, rush into just taking over uh, and start disciplining kids who aren't your biological kids. You just don't have a strong enough relationship with them yet to where they've developed a trust in who are you in their life and how can you come in and tell them what to do. And so the best thing to do, obviously, for the step parent, whether stepmother or stepfather, is to allow the biological parent to do, we'll say, discipline. Both should parent together, but best case scenario would be if there is an issue and there is going to be discipline of some sort. Let's say you're going to ground a kid or you're going to take away a phone privilege or something. The parent should agree with that, maybe behind closed doors, discuss it. But when that door opens and they step out, let the biological parent in these early years give that discipline to their biological kids and just simply be supported by the step parent rather than, unfortunately, oftentimes stepfathers just want to step in and start, parenting. Their motive, I'm sure, is to help their wives to raise these kids, but it just doesn't work very well because there's just not enough of a strong relationship yet. Uh, I'm going to cover one other thing with you, and that's relationship types. And I'm not sure the author discusses this a lot, but I want to cover it. The same way there's structure type of stepfather, stepmother, and blended, there's relationship types. And what that means is different people enter into these step families with a different point of view, some being quite naive, some being very uh, wise about it. And so the most healthy relationship type is called a neo-traditional step family. These people do their homework. They discuss things before they marry about discipline, money, the kids. They do things together, uh, and they understand this 3 to 5 year window of adjustment. And so that marriage is far more likely to succeed, even though it could be a difficult time. It could even be a blended family, but that one's more likely to succeed. The matriarch step family type, relationship type, is a little less likely to succeed, and that's a case in which the mom has had domiciliary rights and she's adjusted to the divorce and single parenting, single parent with her own kids, and so she's been making decisions for some years. And when she remarries, she just continues to operate under those same terms. In other words, she does the discipline, she makes a decision, and unfortunately, that leaves the stepfather in that case out of the cycle of the family, and begins to feel like, well, what part of the family am I? When it comes to the kids, I have no say so. And so that one begins to become quite frustrated and likely not to succeed. And the one that's most likely to fail is called the romantic relationship type, and that's where people are totally naive. They have no clue about step families, adjustments to kids, even parenting kids. They've discussed nothing. They may be in love with each other and get along great, but they find out after the fact that one or the other had no plans on parenting someone else's kids, and that is most likely to fail. All right, so now on page 284, there's a list of adjustments that you could expect, and I've touched on some of these already. And so let me just go through them real quickly. It is an important section. Number one, like I told you before, the first few years of the step family, the remarriage, there's going to be adjustments, and they're going to be very similar to the kids acting out, anger, depression, maybe school problems. So you should expect that there's going to be this adjustment period. There's something that your author covers, and again, it's on 284, and I haven't discussed this yet, and it's called boundary ambiguity. So make sure you read this sentence or two and get this concept. So a boundary ambiguity meaning uncertainty, and a boundary is where you cross certain lines. So a boundary ambiguity means in a new step family, there is some adjustments and roles that change, rules that change. What can I do now? What shouldn't I do now? So you have to think about those things. For instance, if there's been mom had to go back to work full time, and so ex-husband did all the yard work, and now who's going to do it? Well, maybe she pays her son $20 to mow the grass. So he's agreeable to that because he makes a little pocket change, and she gets the yard mowed. And that's how they've been operating. And now mom remarries, and the stepdad, not knowing, thinks he's doing a nice thing and goes out and mows the grass. And the son comes home and is actually angry at the dad. The dad's confused because he thought he did something good, the stepdad. And yet, the way the kid sees it is, you took my allowance away. You took my opportunity to make money. So that was boundary ambiguity. There was no discussion about this. They didn't understand, and there was some confusion. And so these things have to be worked out in these new families. And so, and it can certainly cause problems. The next one I see in the PowerPoint is relocation. I've said it 2 or 3 times, so I'm just going to say it again. In any scenario on a test, you pick the scenario in which all things being equal, if at the end they have to relocate, that's going to create even more adjustment problems. Same thing with discipline. I'm looking at the PowerPoint. I mentioned let the biological parent deliver the message of whatever the consequences are. Now, age of kids at time of the divorce, same thing. Yes, it is a factor. And so the worst time for people to enter into a remarriage and set up house on this new step family is during early adolescence. Early adolescence is already a difficult time. It's the highest conflict time between parent and kids. They're already going through other things with mood swings, puberty, hormones. G. Stanley Hall talked about it. Remember in chapter 1 we talked about storm and stress, and now you're going to have a step parent come in, and so this is just the worst time altogether. My PowerPoint on working parents, right now I'm going to stay with the order of the book. And in the book, I'm looking at adoption, and I don't have a PowerPoint for adoption, page 285. In adoptions, of course, different than a step parent. In an adoption, you can assume that there are also potentially some difficult issues that could be encountered. So let me just take age first. The younger the age, the easier the transition to adopt. As kids, and we're going to use 10 years of age because again that's early adolescence, that's the most difficult time. And so in America, people can be somewhat naive and think that they're doing a wonderful thing, and they are. But when you adopt an older kid, you're also taking on the emotional trauma and loss and things that they have experienced, and quite often are hoping to get back with their biological parents sometimes. So just keep that in mind, that the age is important. A couple other things. Historically, in America, we used a system called screening out. And all that meant was you had some number of families who wanted to adopt kids. Then they would begin screening those kids, those families out. You didn't meet the criteria. You weren't married. You didn't own your home. You didn't have a full-time job. Whatever the criteria was, they would screen you out or drop you off the list of potential adoptive parents until they ended up with this group left. Today, we use screened in, so it's a totally opposite approach in which it's they don't concern themselves with those things. In other words, you may not even be married. You might even be a single person and be an adoptive parent. You might live in an apartment, not have a home. You might have a part-time job. So I guess what I'm trying to prepare you for on the test, you're going to read a scenario. Which of the following would probably not be allowed to adopt? No, they probably all would be allowed to adopt. So even if it's something that goes against what you think, your values, and the reason for that is basically because there are so many kids out there and not enough adoptive families. They are much more inclusive now in who they will allow. Now, you understand, I hope, that of course there are going to be situations in which there's no way. And that's probably going to be people with some sort of criminal history in which there's been abuse, child predators, and things like that. People, drug addicts. So, but short of that, they're pretty much in need of adopted families, and so they're gonna let these people adopt. So just keep that in mind. It'll help you when the test comes. The only other thing I'm going to mention is working parents, and I'm not sure what page it's on, so I'm going to be real quick. This is not a big section, but you may have one question about it, so I want to make sure and give you the information. The question here is regarding families, and today we have, again, 2 working parents more often than not, right? In the old days, traditionally we had husband go to work, mom stay home. That was 68% of our population in America. Today, that's only 18% of our population in America, and 60-something% of our families, both parents work. So the question is, what impact does that have on the kids? 2 working parents, not home. The main problem caused is what they call latchkey kids. So just make a note of that. Latchkey kids are kids who return home from after school and their parents aren't home until they get off work. So there's this little 3 to 6 window, they call it, the 3 to 6 syndrome. There's this time of after school till about 6 o'clock on average that the kids are totally left unsupervised and no one monitoring them. I covered that supervision and monitoring earlier in the chapter and how important it is. And in these situations, it's difficult to do. And so what people don't realize is kids get in most trouble. When kids get arrested, for instance, number one reason kids get arrested is shoplifting, stealing. And they do it sometime after school when they're in these latchkey situations. So it puts them at high risk in that category. Okay? So that's the information I wanted you to get from this chapter. What I want to do is, if you'll indulge me here, I'm going to kind of be glancing down at the test and looking at just a review, if you will, over the next 5 or 6 minutes. So when you go back to the beginning of the chapter 8, just remember that we're looking at the social systems of the family and the reciprocal socialization of parents influencing kids and kids influencing parents. Page 256, pay attention to direct and indirect. I gave you an example of the parents fighting and indirectly having an impact, a negative impact on the kids maybe in school and the grades are falling. And about paragraph 3, there's some good information on egalitarian style, husband and wives mutually respectful, working together, and that has a direct positive impact on their ability to parent their kids. Under the maturation, just pay attention to what's going on in the kids' biological, cognitive, and social changes that are occurring. And for the parental changes, pay attention to the impact that the time spent that the kids need. We're talking adolescence, makes it less positive for the parents. I would pay attention and make sure you know what monitoring is. It's a form of supervision in which you're keeping tabs on who your kids' friends are, what are they looking at on the internet. It doesn't mean you necessarily have them in your line of sight, but you are checking on them, you're keeping up with them. And that information is on page 260. Parenting style is Baumrind stuff. Expect questions that give you an example of what the parents are doing, and you'll figure out whether it's authoritarian, authoritative, indulgent, or neglectful. But you may also have a scenario in which it tells you what the kids are doing, and what you have to do there is work backwards, because Baumrind said in an authoritarian home, boys go out and become more aggressive. They're socially incompetent. Girls become codependent personality types. In an indulgent, for instance, you're going to look for spoiled and self-centered kids and lacking of self-control and socially incompetent. So just pay attention not only to what the parents are doing, but what also Baumrind assumed was the behavior of the kids coming out of those homes. And that's kind of simplistic, really, because it's a lot more complicated than that. And so the question could be, well, what is the criticism of this model? And the criticism would be, yeah, it's not that simple. It's much more complicated. You have to take in the behavior of the kid and how that's affecting the parent. And that would, and basically what I'm saying is she didn't take into consideration reciprocal socialization. She just studied the parents. I'm probably going to pull a question from this parenting styles and ethnicity, maybe two, I'm not sure. But the first part talks about what we would call authoritarian in the American Asian community, Asian American community. They use a model, and it's similar to authoritarian in which they are strict and they are more controlling, but they call it the training style. And it seems to work for them. And then the other example under ethnicity might be inner city high crime, possibly African American community, where they are quite authoritarian with their kids, but it's also seen as a necessary method of parenting because of how dangerous it is for these young people if they're out on the streets. And so these families do use these styles. The area on conflict beginning 264, just a reminder, understand there's typical conflict and then there's prolonged intense conflict. Typical has to do with frequency, but low intensity. Prolonged intense obviously gets into the very serious stuff and can break families apart and need some sort of intervention, outside intervention. I noticed I pulled a lot of questions from the autonomy attachment section, so be sure you can distinguish from scenarios. Of course, autonomy is self-sufficient independence. It's a good thing. It's strongly correlated to authoritative style parent. Low autonomy would be associated with authoritarian because they're not allowed to learn to become very independent by the parents. But in the attachment, remember you have secure and then you have three different types of insecure. And so spend some time on that and make sure you can determine what's going on, who's doing what. So if it's mutual, right? Remember, mutual means dismiss it, avoid it. They both dismiss the relationship as being important or salvageable, and they both avoid each other. That's mutual. But if it's preoccupied, ambivalent, as you're reading this scenario, you're going to see that the kid is wanting time with the parent, and the parent is somewhat indifferent or neglectful, and not that excited about it. And what starts off to be, let's spend time together, ends up being frustration and anger and conflict. And the unresolved, disorganized, then you're looking for any scenario in which the kid has experienced trauma and they've never really worked it out or got help with that. And so read those sections. Again, just give me a second. I'm looking. Yeah, I see about six or so questions on that stuff, so pay attention to that. A couple of questions on birth order, siblings. 80% of kids have two siblings, the good and the bad. I gave you that information. And then look at birth order. Firstborns are very similar to an only child in that they are very achievement oriented, they're very adult oriented, and that just because a kid is an only child does not mean they are necessarily going to be spoiled. The best indicator of that would be parenting style, and that would be the indulgent parents. I'm not going to go page by page because the rest of this I just finished with you in the last presentation, so let me just give you some idea on the beginning in section 4. It looks like starting at question number 27 through the rest of the chapter, so that gives you some idea. About 50% of the test is the things I just covered, and the other half of the test is from section 4 on. So that should give you a pretty good idea how much time you should spend reading section 4 all the way to the end of the chapter on divorce, the statistics, the numbers, and the impact, and so on. So I hope this is helpful. Please don't put off taking the test. Please don't miss it because the makeup tests are difficult, generally speaking, because obviously I haven't prepared you for the makeup test. The questions are random. So good luck, and we'll talk again next week.